What a blast.
Are you covering for Amber today?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. You should probably make you
a co-host. I got it.
Yeah. And I know we're going to have light attendance. Honestly, I will just do roll call. I am not even tracking who's not coming today, but there's a bunch. So.
Okay, it looks like we are good to go. So you can start on time if you choose to do so.
Great. Awesome. We'll give it until 9 o'clock and then launch in. So good to see you, Brian. How are you feeling?
Moving in the right direction.
Good. Very good. Well, you just go lay down and listen to the audio.
I'm gonna attend this committee and I'm not gonna be at the other ones.
Got it. That's fine.
Hopefully you are feeling better, Lee, as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I had my second COVID test yesterday, which was also negative, and I just still can't believe it because I've been pretty down and out. But I haven't been able to taste anything in 3 days, which is such a bizarre feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the hallmarks, but they keep telling me it's negative.
Right. You going in there? No, we've got like another couple minutes. So. Just gonna wait one more minute. I think Jordan's booting up. Great. Okay, I think we will call Parks and Conservation to order here. It is August 25th, 2021. We are still in virtual mode for our meetings. You can join the meeting to comment, to give public comment. You can join virtually by going to our agenda page under the city website and clicking on this meeting to join the meeting. Or you can always email council@ci.missoula.mt.us, or you can call in. We have voicemail option listed as 552-6012. So we are for the near future, definitely in virtual mode, and this is how to participate. Thank you. Let me see. Could you do a roll call, please, Karina? I think we've got a fair amount absent today, but we'll see who we have at this point.
No problem. I'm just waiting on my computer here. Okay. Anderson? I don't see Stacy. Becerra?
She's not here,
Here. Contos?
and he is absent today.
Absent. Harp?
I'm here.
Hess?
Present.
Jones?
Present.
Merritt?
Present.
Ramos?
He's gone today.
Cheryl? Gone. Viseca?
Present.
Von Mossberg?
Here.
West?
Not here.
Heidi.
We might have one or two joining later on, but for now we have 6, which is not a quorum. So we'll just note that for the record. We have minutes from August 11th, 2021 to approve. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved, just noting that we do not have a quorum. And public comment on items not on the agenda. We do have someone who wants to comment. Mr. Larson.
Yes, this is Matt Larson, Ward 3. I just wanted to remind all the council members that are present about the shooting that transpired on August 12th. Brandon Galbraith, who was 21 years old and executed at Beckwith and Stevens, I believe. At least that's what we were told initially. And now I guess the DCI investigation is saying that he has committed suicide. I think that this is a great example of the lack of transparency in the city, and that his own family members haven't even been showed any of the footage in its entirety. Only edited and screen captured photos of the video have been shown to his family, and that's utterly despicable and not acceptable. We should have learned over the course of the last year and a half what this footage really means to the families of the deceased. And it's the 9th officer involved shooting since 2015 in Missoula. So we need to stop cloaking the activities of MPD and start allowing the public and the family members especially to see what's transpiring. There's an open complaint against Officer Gilhouse, who just got an award for the CIT program for not turning on his body camera. And I think it's very indicative of a problem at the police force if you're not turning on your body cameras. We're talking about dash cam video with the Brandon Galbraith stuff. And I think we are seeing a reoccurring problem and theme at MPD. And it would be nice to see any of the people on city council acknowledge this problem. But again, we'll just expect more hand sitting, I guess.
Thank you. And seeing no other public comment, we'll go ahead with our Karina. I'm not sure if I can put his hand. Wait, there we go. Got it. Yep. All right. Going forward with the presentation today, we have Lee Ratterman from the City of Missoula to present to us on the Municipal Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory Report. It is not an action item, but a very important informational item. So good morning, Lee. Good to see you.
Thanks, Gwen, and hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me be here today and talk through our municipal inventory. I just want to kind of quickly point out that this, the data that I'm sharing today is really specific to the City of Missoula greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are currently working on a community emissions report, which I'll be back in front of you hopefully within a month or so to report that out. So I'm just going to share my screen and get started. as I'm just going to keep talking, but as I'm talking, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to interrupt me, and I'm happy to answer anything as we go. So the actual emissions report should be attached to this meeting, but this is kind of just a presentation overview of what we've learned. So essentially, we have adopted some goals at the city. We have a municipal target. So again, just municipal city emissions of carbon neutral by 2025, which is very soon. We have a community target of carbon neutral by 2050. And then as a community, we kind of adopted these municipal interim goals. And so you'll see that in the last one in that black box that we had intended to have a 50% reduction by 2020. And so this, the data from this report is looking at that 2020 data. Spoiler alert, we did not achieve 50% reduction, but there's some reasons why, and there are some great things that we're doing, and there are some real opportunities for the future. And so we're hoping to highlight that as I go through today. So generally, how does the city achieve carbon neutrality, which basically means no greenhouse gas emissions, things like carbon, greenhouse gas emissions from the landfill, and different things. So it's not just carbon, but we call it carbon neutrality because everything is measured in carbon. And basically the way we're going to achieve that is a combination of a measure of conservation and reductions, and then also purchasing carbon offsets for anything that we haven't been able to reduce or get rid of. I'm not sure if anybody has seen the latest report that came out a couple of weeks ago from the International Panel of Climate Change from the UN. It was a stark, really, horrific look at climate change, and there were some really, key things that came out of that. And so I highlighted some of those here, but essentially the report said that we are now in code red for humanity in terms of climate change. In the next 20 years, temperatures are likely to rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which has been kind of the marker, the threshold at which we have been working to stay below, but we're there. And in the next 20 years, we're going to see that. What that means is that we will see more extreme weather patterns, more devastation to health, livability, those sorts of things. And the report also said, and no question about it, this is human caused. So that's the first time that the International Panel of Climate Change has really called out humans as being the cause of this rapid rate of climate change. We see unprecedented rates, over the last 2,000 years, when looking at data over the past 2,000 years. What is needed is rapid and drastic reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions in this decade. So we have amount of time in which we will still hit that 1.5 degrees Celsius likely, but we have the opportunity now to stop from any further horrifying destruction in the future. And so carbon mitigation efforts, as we're talking about, and carbon sequestration efforts are both needed quickly, globally, sweeping changes. And even if we are able to limit to that 1.5 degrees Celsius, we'll still see impacts. They're now inevitable and irreversible. So we're going to see sea levels rising, melting of Arctic ice, warming and acidification of the oceans, and extreme weather patterns. And if the summer has been any sort of warning with the smoke and the heat that we've seen, they're saying that this is the new normal. And so it'll never be as good as it was today. Again, we might see years where things are cooler or wetter, but as a trend, this is the new normal that we're in. And so we can really just work to prevent further devastation for our future generations. And it's a hard thing to ask because what we're asking people to do is make expensive, sweeping changes that affect, people's understood quality of life to, gift to future generations. So it's things that, you and I will probably not see in our lifetime. but we really have the opportunity now. Like now is the time, and that this report really made that clear. And so if you haven't seen or haven't read about it, I really urge you to go check it out. Because it helps support some of the stuff that we're talking today, and when we get to the community inventory and everything, I mean, this stuff is really important, and you know, obviously we're all in agreement since this year's budget cycle reflected some support for climate action, and we're hoping to make some big changes here in the city on our municipal footprint. So here is a graph of basically how we're doing as a municipality in our different sectors. So essentially, we are emitting 18,500 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. I will, in a few slides, kind of do some benchmarking and show you some of the other communities and how they're doing. But we are, you know, pretty on par with a community of our size. And so we could be doing better, we could be doing worse. But you can see here that our water and wastewater facilities and operations are really kind of the bulk of our emissions. Then we move to buildings and fleets, buildings and facilities, and vehicle fleet, street lighting, employee commute, and then solid waste facilities. And I'm going to kind of go through these one by one as we go. So I'm not going to spend too much time here unless anybody has any questions. Okay. This is a little bit about the methodology that we used. I'm not going to go too much into it, except that we've kind of used a standard accepted protocol, which is the ICLEI ClearPath Government Emissions Calculator. And so Charlotte Pasick, who works in the Climate Action Office, literally took bills from Northwestern Energy month by month, inputted them into this calculator, and that's how we got this data. So here is kind of that progress view based on our interim goals. And so you can see a really sharp incline as we go from 2017 to 2020. And I'll talk about why in the next slide. Essentially, you know, you can probably guess why that is that we acquired the water utility. That little green dot in the first one is a look at what our emissions would be like had we not acquired the water utility. So you can see we're still kind of on an upward trend. There are two lines here, and it's a little bit confusing. This is more for kind of the really like data people in the group who want to kind of really dig in. But in past years, we've used that orange line, which is a data factor set that is basically a assumption made by the EPA around greenhouse gas emissions in a geographic area. And so it's a very broad look at Northwestern United States. And we've used that traditionally because we didn't have any better data. However, this year, we were actually able to get specific data from our Northwestern Energy partners. And so that yellow line, we went backwards and we actually updated based on this new data set. And so the yellow line is the more accurate one based on specifically what our greenhouse gas emissions look like in Montana versus that orange line, which is just kind of a broad geographic look that we've used in the past. All right, so what happened? Why did we go up so much? As I alluded to, we acquired Mountain Water in 2017. One thing to note is that these emissions have been accounted for in the past. It's just that we have included them over in our community-based greenhouse gas inventories rather than our municipal. So for the first time, we're moving them over to the municipal inventory, which, you know, gives us a huge spike on the municipal side. But really, as a community, we didn't gain any additional greenhouse gas emissions. It's just now accounted for over here. But that accounts for almost 87% of the increase. And so really that's the bulk of it. One thing that's really great about that is now that we own the utility, we have the opportunity to make the changes to reduce the emissions. And so while that is accounting for a huge percentage of our greenhouse gas emissions as a municipality, you know, we can make the changes to make those better now that we own the municipality. So I see it as a positive thing. Another factor is that the city hired 124 new employees since the last accounting in 2017. That's not much of an emissions increase, less than 1%, but it still counts for something. There's also some infrastructure pieces that we've done as a city over the past 3 years. We've purchased new buildings, expanded lighting infrastructure, and those sorts of things, which accounts for about 10% of the jump. And then for the first time in this inventory, we're accounting for landfill emissions, which we haven't been able to do before or capture. And so it's small, it's less than 1% of the emissions, but again, it's significant, and we hope to be able to kind of better capture that data in the future. So a quick kind of benchmarking, how do we compare? So this is actually really hard to do because every municipality is different. Some municipalities own their landfill, and so they're gonna count all of the data from their landfill like we do for water. And, some municipalities don't own their water utility, and so that that emissions factor isn't counted. And there's really no standardized data points. There's no standardized method of calculation. If somebody doesn't want to use that ClearPath tool, they don't have to. They can do it in any way that they want and release it. And so without standardization and without kind of apples to apples comparison, this is really hard. But I tried to kind of pick a couple of different communities just to give you an idea of where their emissions are coming from. So,
and Lee, I got a question actually. Brian had his hand raised.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
So hang on.
Sorry, I was just wondering, back on the previous slide, the 124 new employees, and I see the note about including Mountain Water, and Dale may know the answer to this as well. I'm trying to remember how many of that 124 was Mountain Water. I feel like it was somewhere in around 80, but do you know of that 124, how much was the water acquisition?
I do. It was about 45.
Oh, so I was much higher. It was off.
But and I think I want to the thing I want to point out about that number. I hope you can hear me because my screen just went off. But
we can hear you.
Okay, that's a number of employee count. It's not an FTE count. So that includes all new employees, but not necessarily the increase in full-time equivalent employees.
Okay, thanks.
And Lee, I also actually wanted to ask a question about that first paragraph regarding Mountain Water. To just take it from the abstract to the specific, when we're talking 87% of emissions, first of all, there is a large building that Mountain Water has, but then also they have a lot of operations around town that are energy intensive, wells, things like that. Is that what does it mean? What is 87% of emissions increase is because of what exactly with Mountain Water?
Yeah, and I do have a slide later on to kind of specifically talk about water and wastewater, but in a nutshell, it is all of the operations associated. So it's the building, it's the pumps, it's the wells, and our city pumps and wells are very outdated. In talking to our water folks, it sounds like about half of the water that's pumped up from the aquifer falls back in. And so our pumps are also, we don't have a lot of containment systems. And so our pumps are constantly working. When somebody turns on their tap, a pump is working to get them water. And so, yeah, there's a lot of room for efficiency improvements and energy efficiency.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Helps to visualize it. I appreciate that. So
absolutely.
I don't see any other questions right now. Let me double check. Yeah, nothing else. So keep going. Thank you. Oh, wait, I take that back. Jordan got his hand up.
Thanks. I had some comments and questions on water, but it sounds like, Lee, we're going to talk more specifically about water?
Yeah, I'll get to the water slide after the benchmarking, I think.
Great. I'll hold off. Thanks.
Okay.
Sure. Okay, so quick comparisons. Tacoma, Washington, which is a much larger community than we are, and they have a lot more municipal employees than we do, and a much larger carbon emission footprint than we do. But just kind of looking at their breakdown, I thought it was interesting that their employee commute was so drastically larger than ours. That must be just kind of the nature of commuting. I think a lot of people probably live in suburban areas and are coming in, but just wanted to give that as an example of a municipality that kind of has a drastic, they probably don't own their water utility, they probably don't own their landfill. It's shocking how small their buildings and facilities emissions are, but again, I can't really say how they calculated their emissions as well, so it's not a standardized practice. A little closer to home, Helena, Montana has smaller population, obviously, similar size employees, smaller carbon footprint, but this is just kind of a look at some of their emissions. They're much more similar to us, with water and wastewater treatment being a large factor, and buildings and facilities as well. Their vehicle fleet is larger than ours. And then here's probably the most similar kind of in population and employee count to us, but Mountain View, California. The difference there is that they own their landfill, and so they count all of the emissions associated with their landfill, whereas with our emissions, we are just calculating the materials that are discarded by City of Missoula staff and going to the landfill. So it's not very helpful, but I just figured I'd kind of put it in there just as a view of why it's hard to benchmark these sorts of things. Okay, so moving on to water. So water accounts for 50% of that larger pie. And you can kind of see at the bottom graph that the water department is the majority of that. So there are over 7,000 MT CO2 equivalency, sorry, of a total of 10,000. So that's very significant. So as I mentioned before, we're looking at all of the things associated: lifts, pumps, the wastewater treatment plant, any sort of standalone electricity, natural gas power, water systems, water use at the cemetery and parks and rec. And that's how we got our number. So I'm just going to kind of move along. I have 2 more slides and then I'll take any questions on water. But this kind of just shows from that first graph what it looks like. So we jumped significantly when we acquired the water utility. And here's a breakdown of the water versus the wastewater treatment plant. So you can actually see at our wastewater treatment plant, we have reduced in emissions a little bit. And that's, a result of some efforts that the folks out at the wastewater treatment plant have done. They've installed a cogeneration unit that's producing some of the plant's electricity and almost all of the plant's heat, which is really exciting. But when we did acquire that water utility, that just really spiked it up. There are some future efforts kind of pending. The wastewater treatment facility are looking at adding some renewable energy. The water folks are looking at potentially adding some renewable energy for a new well. The city and its partners are looking at areas of inefficiency and potential upgrades to the city's water pumps and lift stations. So in seeing this report and, recognizing that they are the biggest contributor to our greenhouse gas emissions, our water department and wastewater treatment staff have really, really kind of dived in with me and looked at all of this stuff and are really willing to make some changes and look at the initial data and look at the inefficiencies and see where we can try to make some change. Any questions on water?
Julie has a question, and then Jordan.
Sorry to preempt you there, Jordan. I would be really interested to track what's going on with the water utility in particular. They've been putting a lot of effort into replacing all of our leaky pipes. And as I understand it, at the time we acquired the water utility, they figured about 50% of the water that they pumped just ended up leaking through the pipes back into the ground. And of course, that is an enormous waste of energy. And so I would expect that our continued investment in replacing all those old leaky pipes will start to pay off. There's one aspect that I've been rolling around in my head. So one of the things, as I understand it, and sadly, I don't think we have anybody from the water utility on here, but I think that we treat the water at the wellheads. Brian's shaking his head, yes, that's true. So, I mean, treating the water obviously is for potable water use, although people who, people who are watering their lawns, for example, with mountain water or Missoula water, are using treated water to do that. And I wonder if there's any, if anyone has looked at that aspect of, like, with our parks, for example, where we irrigate large areas of lawn and garden. I think to some degree we're doing that with individual wells that are not treated. And if there's, if the treatment process itself contributes to greenhouse gases, and if there's, so I'm just thinking of another way that we might be able to offset some of that if we were doing more lawn and garden type irrigation with water from individual wells instead of the treated water from the main municipal wells, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thanks for that suggestion. And I know that the water folks are, very willing to look at any sort of solutions and efficiencies to add into the system. But yeah, from what I understand is we're still, even with water main replacements, we're still seeing a significant amount of water that is treated, pumped up, and then falling back into the aquifer, and then pumped up, treated again, pumped up. And so it's a lot of inefficiency and energy use to do all that.
Thanks. Jordan.
Thanks. And I guess this is another one of those instances where we can tout the significance of the water system acquisition. These emissions, as you mentioned, Lee, these emissions existed prior to the city acquiring the system, and now we have now we're in the position of being able to control and reduce those emissions, and I think we will continue to do that through water main replacement, through acquisition of more efficient pumps, and so on. Do you have a sense from, I guess, from slide 14, there's wastewater treatment, and then there's the water and wastewater operations, and then there's a line for water. Is that line for water emissions attributable to water? Yeah, this one here. That bottom line, is that primarily just pumping, or are there other things involved in that?
So that is all operations associated with the water department, and so it's lifts and pumping, which is for sure the majority of it, but also their building. The only thing that's not included water-wise is the fleet management. So we have them driving around, taking water measurements included in our fleet, but everything else associated with water is in that number. But I will say,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I will say from looking at the data that it is largely lifts and pumps.
Okay.
The contributor.
What's the distinction between water and wastewater operations on that line, and then water department? It looks like maybe there's some water activities attributable to that orange line.
Oh yeah, thanks. Sorry, that's a good point. Is that that might be an error, to be honest. I think wastewater treatment plant and wastewater operations are the light blue and the yellow, and then everything water related is the dark blue. So apologies for that.
So wastewater operations could be like lift stations for wastewater and sort of the similar wastewater functions that are outside of the actual treatment plant itself.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, thanks. Ryan.
Thanks. And Julie and Jordan bring up good points. My understanding is, indeed, we do chlorine dosing right at the wells. It's one of the benefits compared to surface water treatment, where there's a lot more expensive and significant treatment necessary. But it's an interesting question that Julie raises and would be worth looking at. I don't have any sense of that chlorine treatment sort of contribution, but in the same vein, I think what would be interesting to look at with the water utility would be sort of what are what our real opportunity is. The leakage, for instance, is exactly, I mean, people have spoken about that accurately. We leak approximately 50%, so for every 2 gallons of water we pump out of the ground, a gallon leaks back into the ground and we have to pump it back up. The thing that's worth remembering is no water utility has zero leakage. So our opportunity isn't sort of like 50% leakage or 0% leakage. Best practices, as I was researching during the acquisition, range typically 30% leakage, 20% leakage. It's a highly variable thing. So that's what would be really, I think, interesting to know with the utilities, do a deep dive into what our real sort of opportunity for reduction is there, so that we had some good goals to track. And another thing that might be looking at, and it sounds like perhaps already is being looked at, is if we were to power locally with renewable sources at the actual wells, as opposed to being tied into the grid, what kind of savings might we have with that? That happens in agriculture all the time, where pumps are run by solar systems, and usually, I'm sure, large upfront capital expense, but it would be interesting to know over time. So just some thoughts to look into. And I think, to Julie's point, I think doing a follow-up sort of deep dive on this particular area, given its impact on our emissions, would be a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah, thanks for those thoughts, Brian. Dale.
Well, I was going to add to what Brian was suggesting, but that I think Public Works is starting to work on that, and are now involved in our energy performance contractors, McKinstry, to look at exactly those things. And maybe Lee, you could talk a little bit more specifically about them embarking on that path.
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to maybe save that for the end when I'm kind of talking about what are we doing next. But yeah, just to say that they are engaged. They are, even before their council budget presentation, we ended up doing kind of a big, quick analysis of how much could they reduce their emissions in the next 5 years. And so they're thinking about it. They're really on board, which is great. And then one other thing I wanted to say quickly to Julie, your point about the end user, I think that's a really good point too, is that we have to think about water reduction, because we wouldn't have all of these emissions if we were, being more efficient on the water side. And I just wanted to say that our Parks Department is really supportive and really on board with our climate action initiatives. And they're doing some pilots around pesticide-free landscaping so that they would kind of be growing healthier, more local vegetation that doesn't need or require watering as much. And so it's kind of like a really holistic look at how to reduce these emissions.
Great. And Julie had her hand up again too.
Yeah, sorry to double dip, but I just wanted to also bring up on the other end, when we talk about leakage, there's been a lot of discussion about the leakage from the water delivery system, but we also end up with leakage on the wastewater collection system at the other end. And that's usually water infiltrating into the pipes. And we're wasting energy by treating water that's just groundwater that's infiltrating into the wastewater system. And we haven't had as much discussion about that. I mean, I think that our wastewater treatment folks have talked with us about that. But just to say that that's another aspect that we need to continue to put our effort into is making sure that we're maintaining, keeping up with the maintenance on the wastewater collection side.
Great, thank you. And I just want to say, I know that both Brian and Julie will not be on council starting in January, but you all better come to these meetings and provide good comment, because your expertise and areas of background are invaluable. So you're never going to be off the hook. That's public service. Okay, guys. All right, Lee, back to you.
Thanks. And I second that sentiment. Okay, so moving on from that look, we're going over to buildings and facilities, which makes up about 18% of our pie. One, you can kind of see through the years how things have gone. One shining example is the last one is Splash. Splash has done some significant energy performance upgrades and have seen their emissions and energy use drop year over year. And so that's really how we want to see. We want to see more drastic changes, but that's the trajectory we want to see. And the others just, have varying levels, staffing, use of buildings, those sorts of things. A lot of the yellow lines are higher because of COVID. A lot of the buildings had to install, additional safety measures like filtration systems and those sorts of things that are adding to the energy use. And so really, I wanted to say at the beginning that we really see this year as kind of the new baseline because we do have the water utility now. We have some new practices in place and those sorts of things. And so while, we did have these interim goals, we really are kind of looking at this year as like, this is the first year we really have an accurate measure of what our emissions look like with the new factor sets and including the landfill emissions and all those sorts of things. So one really positive that we see is the city has also adopted a 100% clean electricity goal. And the first step in that is getting everything off of natural gas to electricity. And this is the first year that we've seen our electricity use higher than our natural gas use. And so we really hope to continue to see a decline in natural gas operations and equipment and those sorts of things as we move more towards electricity, as we're working to clean up our electrical grid. You can see that there is just a minor year-over-year increase in our emissions from buildings and facilities. So that's really great news as we're doing simple things such as changing fluorescent light bulbs to LED bulbs, different, efficiency measures. We really are seeing some positive changes. And so for all buildings and facilities, we only saw an increase of, just over 50 MTs of CO2e. So some of the reduction efforts that we're currently working on is we are doing that energy performance contract, which again, I'll talk a little bit more about at the end. But the basic idea of that is to identify and implement opportunities for energy conservation, renewable energy efforts, and those sorts of things through existing city buildings and facilities. We are involved in efforts to educate and encourage green building practices in all city-funded projects. So really ensuring that all of our dollars are going towards green building and climate action measures in kind of new development. And as I mentioned before, we have the 100% clean electricity, which we have adopted as a city, and we're kind of in a MOU with Northwestern Energy and the county and continue to work on creating a green power product that the city and residents can buy into to support renewable energy and just figuring out ways to clean up that power grid. Any questions on buildings? Kind of a straightforward one.
Not seeing any.
Right. So vehicle fleet is essentially just, all of the vehicles that we're driving around as part of our city operations. Not too much to say here. It is going up because we have new employees. And again, with the water utility acquisition, those employees are driving around the neighborhoods, taking readings from cars. And so that's kind of a significant increase in our fleet and mileage and emissions. We are constant. Oh,
we do have a question.
Yeah,
And also, I wanted to let the record reflect that Stacy Anderson joined a while ago. But Julie, did you have a question on this?
I'm curious about how we calculate the effect of the fleet. I mean, I know there's a lot of difference between how the fleet vehicles are operated. For example, I know we've heard from some constituents who are concerned about the fact that the police vehicles are often left idling in the parking lot. And I guess just curious about the methods for how we estimate that with the fleet.
Yeah, it's a really imperfect method, I will admit. We basically look at mileage that the cars have driven. And so we get a spreadsheet on all of the gas fill-ups and kind of the mileage associated, and then we do the calculations that way. And so it's not accounting for the police vehicles that are idling. Yeah, there are a lot of holes in the methodology that we do have access to now. Another one I'll talk about is on the landfill. It's not looking at all of the emissions associated with mining and producing and transporting all of the goods that we are then discarding. It's just looking at the back end. And so yeah, it's really imperfect, but it's kind of the best that we have now. And it's something that we can use really just to encourage, big change. Like we're looking at electrifying the fleet as much as possible, including there are some communities that are moving towards electric police vehicles. And so that's pretty exciting. And so we're kind of looking at some of those options.
Quick follow-up. I guess if you are using the amount of gasoline that's being purchased, you probably are factoring in that idling time, because those police vehicles probably look like they get really low mileage.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're probably not, using the same gas consumption as if they were pressing on the gas, but it is using something. So that is a good point.
Great. Jordan.
Thanks. I was going to ask about fleet electrification. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. I was, I guess, specifically wondering if there's any, and you touched on it, Lee, but if there's any vehicles that are suitable as police vehicles that are electric. I know they have to be pursuit rated or have some certain attributes to be eligible as police vehicles. Is that something that we've explored, and is that something that where there's options available?
There are, from my understanding, and so I think it's kind of a novel concept, and I want to say maybe it's Austin that has started switching over and have found some abilities to, I don't know about pursuit vehicles specifically, but to switch over some of their police vehicles to electric. And yeah, I understand it's a challenge because also the computer system is connected to the running engine, and they need to be able to access the computer immediately as they're going out in pursuit. And so I think there for sure are some challenges, but there's some low-hanging fruit. Like our Parks Department is wonderfully on board, and they're looking to make some changes to their fleet, not only in electrifying, but also kind of right sizing. And that's something that myself and Charlotte in my office would like to help, is to kind of look at the vehicles that we do have and figure out, like, does it make sense for the Parks Department to send out a pickup truck to go pick up a couple of trash stations versus, a smaller vehicle, and kind of look at current operations and where we can right size some of the current operations with what we have, but then also create best practices and purchasing policies for the future.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so
Great.
how about it, Lee?
Okay, so street lighting. Street lights are the majority in this, but it also includes parking structure lighting, traffic signals. This is our shining example of a downward trend that we want to see. And that's solely because we have been transferring street lights over to LED lights, and Northwestern Energy has as well. And so we're really seeing that make a huge change in our emissions. And so that's what we want to see. The city also adopted a dark skies ordinance in 2016, which includes energy conservation measures. And so we're seeing, as new lighting goes up on buildings, we're seeing more efficient lighting. And as I mentioned, yeah, the LED technology is nearly half the energy and lasts a lot longer than existing lighting technology that we've used. So we hope to continue to see that and have that number go right back down. Jordan, did you have a question?
Jordan, your screen is dark, but we see your hand up. Not.
I'm sorry, you caught me while I was crawling around under the desk to plug in my computer. I don't have any more questions.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Back to you, Lee.
Great. So employee commute, as you saw in some of those benchmarking examples, employee commute is really high for other communities, but it's not as high for us. Luckily, we have a lot of employees who aren't commuting too far, who live in the city, who are walking, biking, busing to work. One interesting thing is you can see we did a pre-COVID and then a since COVID analysis. And we dropped very significantly during COVID. And I think partially to that, overall, we did see a huge increase. And that is due to just more of those employees, as we've talked about, and more people commuting. But we're hoping that, so this was, that huge increase includes mostly is from that pre-COVID time, because this is fiscal year 2020 data. So most of it comes before COVID happened and shut us down. But since COVID, the city has now adopted this new telecommuting policy, which we are really hoping will continue to reflect that right column rather than the left column. And so we're really hoping that in the future, we're going to see a lot less emissions coming from the employee commute. And also the city can do a lot to continue to encourage people to use alternative transportation options. Okay, so moving on, solid waste facility. Again, as I mentioned before, that this is just waste generated from city employees. So we didn't capture material collected at parks or anything that might be, more associated with community members. That will come in our community inventory. One thing to note about this is that the calculation is just the emissions from the landfill, and like I said before, it does not capture a consumption-based emissions such as mining, production, transportation of the materials. Generally, when we do look at consumption-based emissions, solid waste accounts for usually about 40% of the pie when we look at the global impact of the things that we purchase and use and then discard. And so that less than 1% again is not a super accurate look, but it's really just the emissions coming from the city of Missoula. And then this, we have never calculated it before. So, it's an increase, but only because it was zero before. And we did in 2020 commission a study to kind of look at our municipal and community waste, and we're looking at ways to identify how we can further reduce the waste that we are sending to the landfill. Including, as you can see in the right-hand side, that orange piece of the pie is construction and demolition material. And so a significant amount of the stuff going to the landfill is organic, so our food waste, but also materials from the building industry. And that's part of that green building effort that I mentioned before, is we're trying to encourage people to deconstruct and reuse rather than demolish and landfill construction materials. Okay, so just a couple more slides and then I'm done. So I just want to talk about some of our current efforts. So this is, again, specific to our municipal goals, not including our community goals. But on the state level, we are currently involved in supporting an intervention with Northwestern Energy's proposal to build a new gas-powered facility in the state of Montana. And so that is kind of currently happening. Diana Mineta from the county is leading that effort and is acting as the expert witness to intervene on that process. And so we're hoping that maybe that'll be successful and will encourage less fossil fuel production and more renewable energy. At the same time, we're partnering with Northwestern Energy to try to create this green power product that I mentioned before. Specific to our municipal level, we are under contract with McKinstry to do an energy performance audit. And so they are working with the majority of our departments and buildings, including the fire stations, the parking commission, and now water and wastewater folks, among others, to really look at energy use, to make recommendations on some energy efficiency opportunities. And then they're also will act as the contractors to help facilitate the process and get it done. One of the things I've found that's been most exciting, so I stepped into this McKinstry project when I got hired just over 2 months ago, and have been kind of coming up to speed with them, but we have just started kind of making recommendations to the different departments who are participating. And the thing that has been most exciting to me is that meeting with all of the department heads and hearing their enthusiasm for our climate action goals. And so basically what we're asking in these initial meetings is, here are all of your options. Some of them are, just really like, you can replace this for this. And then some of them are, these would meet our climate action goals. There's absolutely no payback. That would make sense, but it is like, the pie in the sky, best option we could do. And not one person has told us to take those off the possibility list. And so I'm just seeing a lot of support from our city leaders, and a lot of actual verbal mentioning of our climate action goals and how we need to take them seriously. And so that's been really encouraging for me. We have as I have mentioned a couple times, 100% clean electricity. We have a goal of reaching that by 2030, which means cleaning up the grid in whatever way that looks like, whether we're successful with Northwestern Energy or looking at local renewable energy options, as Brian mentioned before. We have a goal of 0 by 50 by 2050. We have an internal conservation and climate action plan, which is driving a lot of these efforts and is kind of a roadmap for how we're going to get to where we need to go. We've recently been working on sharing stories of success and cross-departmental collaboration and communication. And so we have a lot of really cool things going on. Like I mentioned, the pesticides-free program at the Parks Department that a lot of people don't know about. And, a lot of people complain about pesticides in our public lands, and we're actually working on solving that issue. And so I'm really trying to help share those stories so that we kind of get some of the credit that we're due for the great things that we're doing. One of the things I've been working with Dale on is to try to create a climate action decision-making lens similar to the equity lens that is kind of pushing through now. And so really encouraging and ensuring that when leaders are making decisions, they're looking at things like equity and climate action together and making decisions based on those goals. And then continuing with just data collection and forecasting, into reports like this, we really want to include carbon sequestration. We want to include things like wildfire emissions as our wildfire seasons get worse and longer. It's really devastating to see all of the efforts we do here versus the amount of carbon emitted during a wildfire. It's pretty crazy. But we have a lot of healthy trees and healthy turf land that we're trying to quantify into carbon sequestration, so we can show not only what are we emitting, but also what are we sequestering, and kind of get a more accurate look. And then lastly, we have a lot of future efforts for our municipal goals. And so these are just kind of under those big buckets. Some of the things that we're looking to achieve is for that big, carbon neutrality. We're looking at what does it mean to purchase carbon offsets? Where would the best investment be? We're looking at significant investment and equipment upgrades with our McKinstry partners. Like I mentioned before, focusing more on carbon sequestration efforts, making sure that we have healthy soil, healthy forests, sustainable agriculture that will help pull carbon out of the air as we're stopping our emitting of carbon as well. 100% clean electricity. We're looking at electrifying equipment, operations, fleets, investing in green power, as I mentioned. 0 by 50, we're looking at hopefully adopting in the near future internal purchasing policy that would help with that climate lens and make sure that everything that's purchased kind of goes through some sort of review process to make sure that it's the most environmentally friendly material. And we're working to try to get compost service for all city-owned buildings so that we can divert more material from the landfill. And then this idea of resiliency is something that we haven't really focused on yet as a city, but it's something we really need to do, because in the very beginning, when I was talking about that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that we're going to hit and all of the ramifications of that, we have to make sure that we are building a resilient Missoula to weather the effects of climate change. And so while we're working really hard to stop and mitigate the emissions, we also need to kind of be realistic and look towards the future and see how we can be more resilient, from simple things like encouraging water efficient landscapes and encouraging water wise yards instead of grass in new development, to stronger bridges and stronger roads and those sorts of things that are going to have an effect as we get hotter and drier and more extreme in the future. I think that's it.
Great, thank you for tons of information this morning. Questions from council? Julie.
Thanks. Not to be a fly in the ointment, but I kind of think that telecommuting is, it just pushes some of that cost into a different column, which is the employee's home. So while we save with them not commuting to work, they're like, for me personally, I have my heat on all winter now that I'm in my house. So just some of that is just shifting. I do have a question about has there been any decisions made about the fate of the poplar trees? I don't know how big of a sink of carbon that is on the grander scale, but yeah, I've been curious of what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, from my understanding, it's very much still in discussion. They are looking at the option of cutting down the trees and growing a different crop that might be more successful. You know, I've talked a lot with our urban forestry folks and our wastewater treatment folks, and everybody recognizes that the trees do have a benefit, and it's just a matter of quantifying, like you're saying, that benefit to see if it's enough to kind of justify keeping the trees. Dale, did you have anything to add to that? Like,
well, I think, while we haven't measured the carbon sequestration benefits of it, there is a huge benefit in keeping nutrients out of the river. And so we're not looking, I mean, we're as we look at, while the market has dried up for this type of wood, plan A for the use now is in our composting operation, where they do need, continued need for woody materials. And I think we can use that up. I think the most viable option for us moving forward on a more usable crop is alfalfa, and it has a very similar nutrient uptake than our poplar trees. And we're actually, trying to make plans to even expand further our ability to land apply some of this, just because as nutrient standards are going to get more stringent over time, and if we can be proactive in land application, we get that benefit of one, a really cost-effective way of keeping nutrients out of the river, rather than building treatment plants that are tens of millions of dollars. We also get the benefit of carbon sequestration. So we are still seriously looking at that.
Just quick follow-up, if I may, Gwen. I mean, I've always assumed that the poplar trees were going to be harvested, and that's, I guess, is what happens to them once they're harvested. And same thing like with alfalfa. You grow alfalfa and you cut it and you bale it and you feed it to cows, and they produce methane. So, I mean, I guess what I'd like to see is that we think about these things all the way to the very end of the process. And because if we're not doing that, then we're just gaining short-term and not long-term.
Thanks for that, Julie. Brian.
I just wanted to say thanks for the presentation, Lee, and welcome. Though you've been here for a bit, I know it's first presentation, and I appreciated at the beginning you calling out the urgency of action relative to the IPCC report, and there's a lot that could be said on that front, and I think probably the most important thing to say is the responsibility that so many experts have pointed out for folks at every level of government, local, state, and federal, to be taking action on this. I mean, the House is literally on fire, and so I appreciate you pointing that out at the beginning of the presentation. I know we've talked about getting you in front of council on a more regular basis with some of the other efforts that we have. You mentioned the city's 100% clean electricity resolution with the county and the other communities in the state that have adopted those goals. And I also just appreciate that it is always difficult to start a position and inherit plans and updates that you weren't around to influence and to out of the gate report on them. So I just wanted to acknowledge and say thanks. It's always a challenge, but I think the council over multiple many years and with different people on council, some new and folks that have been on for a while, there's been a consistent support. And I go back to when I was helping as a volunteer author this municipal plan for the city. And one of the most memorable parts of that was testifying in support of it in front of council. And at that point, I don't think I was thinking of running for council, and seeing even with the late council member Dick Haynes, there was unanimous support on the council at that point for adopting this plan. So these efforts are important. They have had near universal support over many, many years with different folks on council. And that's all to say, I think not 100%, but you will find consistent super majority support for activities and bold action on this front. So thanks.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you chiming in on that. And I want to say also thanks, Lee. This is a great presentation, super clear and easy to follow, which is an art in and of itself. So I appreciate that. I did want to just put out there, and I don't know that you necessarily have an answer right now, but I feel like it had been a while since we'd had an update, frankly, on the status of all of these projects. And I feel like there should be kind of a regular check-in with council. On the other hand, I also want you working on all of this stuff and not just preparing presentations to tell us what we're planning on doing. So nothing to figure out right now, but we will have a new council seated in January. And I feel like once a year is not enough given the urgency of this issue. So we'll circle back and we can figure it out, but just be thinking of that, how to what degree you should be updating council. And it doesn't always need to be necessarily as comprehensive as today. So just as part of the ongoing communication effort. All righty. Are there any other questions from anyone? Not seeing that. Any public comment? Not seeing any raised hands there. So thank you again, Lee. I appreciate it. And yes, we just have 2 or 3 minutes left. So excellent timing on all of this. Thank you so much. And actually, one piece of business, we do now have a quorum. So let's go back to our minutes. Are there any changes to our minutes? If not, those will stand approved so that those are just in the system for our clerk. All righty. Thank you very much. And we will stand adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.